Happy VD! Happy Valentine's Day. It's my little joke on the world. I love to walk around and just say Happy VD just to see the reaction people get, because it's either or, you know. Man. Anyway, it's a beautiful day. I'm going to talk a little bit about some terms that are probably a lot more widely used in today's culture. At least I see them a lot more, and that's divine masculine and divine feminine, and what it actually means and how it pertains to another label and or title called the Twin Flame Journey. A little quiet in here, sorry. A lot of people have a very rudimentary understanding of those particular aspects of it's not just a spiritual or energetic portion of somebody, it's also part of their psyche, and it's also part of their emotional state. Okay. Of course, divine masculine, divine feminine also tie into two other labels that are widely used now that a lot of people don't believe in, and that's toxic masculinity and toxic femininity. All that basically means is anything in excess is abusive. Something my grandfather used to tell me all the time. And it's absolutely true. Even breathing. You breathe too fast or too much, guess what? You hyperventilate. Okay. You can also cause what's known as acidosis, which is too much carbon dioxide in your system. And yeah, it changes the pH of your blood and all kinds of other funky stuff happens. Anyway, it's not the point. Well, that's a good way to put it. A friend of mine just messaged me back and said, Happy Valentine's Day, Happy Heart Chakra Day. I like that. I'm going to keep that one. So, anyway, DMDF. First and foremost, everyone has masculine and feminine energy. Okay. A lot of people will get things because they only have a very rudimentary understanding, and they think that just because they're a man, they're immediately divine masculine, and just because they're a woman, they're immediately divine feminine. Nope, not true. Actually, in my experience, probably maybe a little more than half of the people I run into, they actually resonate in the opposite more often than they realize. And there are reasons for that as well. I'm a perfect example of that. I'm a male, excuse me, and I resonate more in the divine feminine energy than I do in what a lot of people would call the divine masculine. Actually, at this point in my life and on this point in my journey, I'm learning how to achieve a balance between the two, a healthy balance. How all of this pertains to what a lot of people call the twin flame journey, which I personally think is another overly used, exaggerated, even abused label. It's really nothing new. It represents a very profound, deep connection to another I'll use the very convenient term, another soul. I don't necessarily like to use that term because it separates the fact that doesn't separate. It overlooks the fact that we are all one. Every soul is connected to source, and every soul is part of source, and therefore every soul is part of every other soul you ever meet in one way, shape, or form. and I'll do something else on that too. But anyway, so back to the twin flame journey. As I mentioned in other videos, it can be one of the most wonderful, blissful connections you've ever had in your life. It can also be one of the most triggering, even traumatic and depressing and hurtful connections you've ever had in your life. The theory is that it is essentially the other half of your soul, or your soul is, your essence is experiencing two lives simultaneously. And maybe it's become a more widely used term just because collectively there are a lot of people waking up to a particular level of consciousness. And part of that level of consciousness is realizing these connections and interactions we have with each other energetically, and realizing that we are all one. Age of Aquarius, baby. I love it. And I'll get more into that too. So, how divine masculine and feminine pertain to the twin flame journey in my experience. I don't like to speak on anything unless I have experience with it. And I'll put this in context of myself. I'm not going to speak on my counterpart. I actually did a video not too long ago called The Tale of Two Unicorns, which is kind of a metaphorically way of describing exactly what I'm about to describe. So, usually on the TF journey, you have counterparts, okay? And you could think of it this way. You could think of it as magnets, or as a lot of people think of it, as two different flames. In my understanding, part of the purpose of having a dual incarnation, we'll think of it in those terms, almost like dual citizenship, is to accelerate the learning, not even learning, the experience portion of the human condition, okay? And the whole point to that is for the soul to experience life in all of its incarnations, good, bad, and ugly, okay? So that those experiences at some point essentially get added to the collective and go back to source, and therefore get shared among all of the pieces of source that are individual souls. So you could think of it as like a fast track, okay? At some point, there was a contract, as some call it, a soul contract written out, where it says, okay, we're going to experience two separate lives. Now, usually, when these two come in contact at some point, or get activated, as a lot of people call it, there is an exchange, energetically and spiritually, where a lot of the experiences up to that point are swapped or shared or mirrored, is a better way to put it. Now, the thing about mirrors is mirrors, not only do they reflect, but they also reverse, okay? And this is why I say sometimes think of it as magnets. In the physical world, opposites attract, okay? So just like magnets have a north and south polarity on a dipole magnet anyway, those opposite ends will attract, okay? So in my experience, for example, at the time I had met my counterpart and we became activated, I actually resonated more in the divine masculine energy, and they were more in the divine feminine. Well, at some point, that switched. After we'd had enough of an exchange energetically and spiritually, it naturally switched, okay? And there are reasons for that. because that's the next phase of a journey, really, ultimately, is the message I've gotten from my meditations and downloads. It also goes back to in my experience, in my life, I should say. Part of the other reason of the twin flame journey is it's a healing journey. Okay. And one of the things it is to teach you is the faith that you truly don't need anyone else and that you are whole. It's to heal you. It's to heal your soul. It's what every soul wants, is to remember and remind themselves of the unconditional love they have when they're connected to Source. Okay? And this is essentially the whole purpose. Once these two interact, they get reminded of that feeling because they feel like they're at home. Because you've now connected with a part of you that has had a whole nother life and a whole nother experience. And it feels right because it's a perfect lock and key. Well, that's what it feels like when you go back home. That's what it feels like when you go back to Source. Or to put it in modern Christian terms, that's what it feels like when you're filled with the Holy Spirit. Okay? And this is why it can be a very traumatic and depressing experience, because at some point, not always, but most of the time, once that exchange has happened, that experience has been exchanged spiritually and energetically between the two, they usually switch roles. So in my case, I went from divine masculine over to divine feminine. And the reason I did, and the reason my counterpart swapped as well, is because we both had particular wounds, certain abandonment wounds, mine coming from my birth with my mother, but also with a slight twist of self-worth issues from my father in my upbringing. Well, the only way for me to properly heal my divine masculine side was to start to resonate in my divine feminine and teach myself and my inner child that I am worthy of love. And vice versa for my counterpart. The only way for them to heal their abandonment wound from their mother's side was for them to go into their divine masculine energy and teach themselves that they can provide and will protect themselves. You see the mirroring? Am I making this clear enough? And that's what I mean by mirrors. Not only reflect, but they reverse. And this happens on many, 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 many layers. Sometimes mirroring, depending upon what it is. Usually when it comes down to 3D experiences, for example, twin flames will have very similar experiences or very similar types of wounding that need to be healed. And that's the whole purpose of meeting your twin. You have this recognition of what it's like to be back in Source and rejoined with the All, the Most High. And it feels like home, and it feels wonderful. And you feel unconditional love and unconditional acceptance and understanding and all of that. Great. And that's the part you got to remember. Because that's really what the purpose is for. Now that you've been reminded of that, and you have remembered with another part of Source, your counterpart, okay, now it's time for you to finish the healing journey in separation, usually, at least in my experience. Now, does that mean that union will happen again? Maybe, maybe not. No, it's no guarantee. I hope for that, of course, absolutely. Which is why I've spent so much time focusing on the inner work that needed to be done. Some call it the shadow work, some call it the dark night of the soul, some call it this, some call it that. I could go on for hours and go through all the different labels and essentially explain the same thing over and over. I could go through almost every religion in the world and show you the same story and the same path over and over and over. The roadsides might be in a different language, but you know what? All paths lead to Rome. whole point to all of this is to just experience it and eventually go back home and share that experience with the rest of the collective, with the rest of the souls out there. It's the only way God, Goddess, Gaia, pick your title. It's the only way the universe can truly experience itself, is to become part of its own creation, to experience the grandeur of its creation. Now, could you truly experience your own creation if you knew it was your own creation? No. If you really want to have the full experience, you have to forget. You have to disconnect enough and realize and go through the experience. And then at some point, you will remember, as in RE-member, you will rejoin and re-become with Source. And this is what it means to raise your vibration, to raise your consciousness. Because as you do, you start to see things from a higher perspective. And then you start to realize, oh, wait a minute. We all are one. We're all having this absolutely insane, magical, wonderful, blissful, horrifying, terrifying roller coaster thing we call life. So back to the point, because I just definitely segued there a little, sorry. Have a little bit of passion sometimes. DF and DM. So in my case, to finish healing my divine masculine side, I had to start resonating more in my divine feminine. I couldn't resonate in my divine feminine until after I had met my counterpart and they activated that in me. Okay. How they activated that in me was they had already healed most of their divine feminine. Okay. They had already worked on that part. I was working on the other half. We came together. Our souls exchanged that experience and that knowledge. And then we ended up triggering the fuck out of each other and parted ways. Now, I pray that my counterpart has had the same amount of enlightenment that I've had and looks at this experience the same way I do, which is with complete and utter gratitude. They didn't break me, they broke me open. And I'm so grateful for it. And I'm so grateful for the lessons I've learned. I truly am. And I want nothing but the absolute best for them. I have no ill feelings at all towards this person. They did what they needed to do. I did what I needed to do. And I see the purpose behind all of it now. It happened exactly the way it was supposed to happen. As painful as it was. And that was part of it. It was necessary. You can't be reborn unless you die. You can't get found unless you get lost. As I said in my last video, it's all about relativity. It really is. So, anyway, traumas were triggered. I'm grateful that I'd had enough experience in my life and enough of whatever, wherewithal, faith, whatever it was, to see and identify all of this stuff and to do the inner work and to do the healing. And I'm a better person for it. In my personal belief, counterparts who go through this process, if they do come back into union at some point, which is not necessary. My point is this. Once again, back to the Lightworker video. We went through it so that we can show other people how to go through it, so that we can show people what the transformative and healing power of true unconditional love is. Not just unconditional love of another, but unconditional love of oneself, unconditional love of life, and how healing that can be. And realizing that we are worthy of the unconditional love of Source, of God, Goddess, Yahweh, so forth and so on and so on and so on. I'm not going to get into the semantical arguments, okay? And this is how I'll tie this back into addiction. Most addicts that I've met, 99% of them, myself included, have a huge resentment towards the divine. And part of that resentment is at some point they, through a myriad of experiences, convinced themselves that they were unworthy of the love of the divine. And that's not true. I don't think the divine is capable of not loving you unconditionally. You are part of its creation. You are part of it. That would be like saying, I hate this hand, but I love this one, because the thumbs are opposite. What? That makes absolutely no sense. Like, at all. They're the same hand. Okay, anyway, you get my point. And that's what this is really all about. So the whole divine masculine, divine feminine thing, just like anything else, it's vocabulary, folks. It really is. How those can become toxic? Well, it's real simple. You resonate in one and you become out of balance. You resonate in one too much and you become out of balance to the point where, for example, if you are toxic divine feminine, you're an overgiver, you're an over-nurturer, you're a people pleaser. It's a form of codependency, which is a form of addiction. Okay? You're divine masculine, toxic masculinity, basically the same thing. It's just the opposite. You don't have a good balance between self-care and self-love or loving of others. You may be very unemotional. You may be or too stoic or too aloof. You have no empathy or no sympathy. You're almost sociopathic. Anything in excess is abusive. It's like the label narcissist. I'm so fucking tired of that label. First and foremost, every person on this planet has traits that could be labeled narcissist. You can't have healthy self-worth and healthy self-esteem and self-love and self-care without loving yourself. Now, don't get it twisted. Narcissism does not just mean self-love. It means self-worship. And a true narcissist will seek external validation to prove to themselves that they are worthy of their own worship and that other people should worship them as well. And it gets a little twisted, and there's some other variants in there, whether you're a malignant narcissist and all this other shit. Hitler, I'm not going to get into it. But people think just because somebody stands up for themselves and puts up maybe extreme but healthy boundaries because they've decided to make a choice for them that they thought was healthier for them, it's not narcissism. They're making a healthy choice for them. If you're hurt by that, that's a problem on you, not them. No one is responsible for the way you feel except you. It's a harsh truth, but it's true. Watch my video on accountability. But yeah, it's another term that gets so widely misused and abused anymore. Well, same thing with love. You know, it's widely misused and abused as well. But sometimes people don't know better. Most of the time, people don't know better. Most of the time, people just do what they were taught as kids. And they just repeat the same patterns over and over and over and over. You have to make a conscious, intentional, purposeful effort to really start to grow and change. Nobody ever said it'd be easy, but they said it'd be worth it. Dude, if I get one more of these calls, oh my god. Right, I'm gonna leave it at that. Have a beautiful, blessed day.